According to my crib sheet, tonight we are going to, well, go over a number of things, but get to the Seventh Ecumenical Council and a little bit past it, because the Seventh Ecumenical Council was specific to deal with an issue that we'll talk about, but like many of the other ecumenical councils, it did not resolve it. So there has to be a little bit of history behind it to get to the real end. So you could say that the subject is the Seventh Ecumenical Council. However, the subtitle of tonight's session is that does that pique your curiosity?
It does.
Yes.
I didn't expect you to write that down.
First of all, some of this is a recap, but it's not working, is it? I wanted to say a few things about the developments in the church at this time. A number of things happened because, as you will recall, Constantinople is now the only unoccupied see or patriarchate in the Orthodox world. And so things really kind of happened in Constantinople. We mentioned this before, but there was certainly a solid movement towards the use of the liturgies of St. John Chrysostom and the liturgy of St. Basil the Great, and a development of the cycles of services and the feasts. This all being known today as the Byzantine Rite. And these are the liturgies and the cycles and the feasts, by and large, that we observe in the church today. I think I also mentioned, but particularly during this time, there was a growing emphasis on the Holy Virgin, on the Theotokos, and the feasts associated with her. I've also mentioned that, and here's probably why, we've gone through already several, and we'll see some more, attacks on the city of Constantinople, which thus far have been failures for the attackers, although some of them have been prolonged. But through prayer and gathering in the churches, it became obvious to the Orthodox, the Christians in Constantinople, on these occasions that the Theotokos was in fact protecting them and protecting their city. There was a great flowering of Kontakia and Stikera in the services. There was, a little bit before this time, a man by the name of Romanos, I think he was a monk, wasn't he? St. Romanos, the Melodist?
Melodist.
I believe he was. And he miraculously acquired the ability to chant. And subsequently wrote many of the verses and things that, hundreds I think of them. One other thing that really became standardized and used more frequently was the Canon of St. Andrew, which we use during Lent. And it's really focused on repentance. It gets to me. And if you don't remember it, then take advantage of attending the Canon of St. Andrew. You'll have plenty of opportunities during the coming Lenten season. And there was a continuing emphasis on Christian art, Christian icons and mosaics, which in a few years is going to be the focus of a lot of conflict. There were also distortions that crept in temporarily, I guess, in Constantinople. Anastasius of Sinai is quoted as saying, "Many think that he sufficiently reveres his baptism who, entering the church, kisses all the icons without paying any attention to the liturgy and the divine services." So I guess there was some of that going on.
Still is.
Still is. There were some other strange things that were going on. There are records, in fact, of people taking icons as godparents, of scraping paint from the icons to add to the Eucharistic wine, and of placing the sacraments on the icons so as to receive the blessing from the saint. But of course, these things did not survive in our services. We mentioned last time.
Well, and they were isolated events too.
Right.
I mean, they weren't.
Right. Although they were isolated events in Constantinople. We mentioned last time the Triumph Council, and answered a question on it. It was in 692, and it was precipitated by Emperor Justinian II. Remember, Justinian I was quite an emperor, and the second one came along right after him. After the Triumph Council, Emperor Justinian II began to redo the imperial palace in Constantinople and to initiate fairly large building projects within the city, and to spend down, because of that, the money in the city's accounts. Coffers. And he continued to do that until such time that he had to start funding his grandiose ideas by increasing taxation within the city. And that went on for some time, and the taxation got heavier and heavier, and people really turned against Justinian II. And in 695, he was deposed with some vigor. Enough vigor that people said, what can we do to Justinian to ensure that he cannot be emperor? And somebody must have said, we can cut off his nose. because nobody without a nose could possibly be an emperor. So they did. They cut off his nose. And he was given the nickname from that point on Justinian Rhinometos. Greek. Comes from two words, and it means Justinian of the severed nose. So there's one. Well, he apparently knew the geography of Constantinople pretty well. He immediately left Constantinople, not surprising, and went north to Bulgaria and enlisted or created an army of Bulgarian soldiers and brought them back to Constantinople, and in the darkness of night led the army up tunnels that went under the walls of Constantinople, tunnels that were to supply the city with water, so that he retook the city and began Justinian of the severed nose, his second period as reign as emperor. And it was a terrible period. He did not change his ways. In 717, a new emperor, or he became emperor after he came, Leo the Isaurian. This is another word for Syrian. So you could say Leo the Syrian. Entered Constantinople. If you remember, there was a Heraclius Justinian, now Justinian II. These were all related, and it was called the Heraclian dynasty. Leo in 717 brought an end to the Heraclian dynasty because he was not Heraclian. He was not Heraclian. He was Syrian. He came from Syria. So he had been raised in a Muslim environment, a Muslim nation. He was not a Muslim, obviously. Within a few months of him entering into Constantinople, here we go again, a Muslim army of 120,000 soldiers and 1,800 ships attacked Constantinople and basically laid siege to the city for a year. It went through a harsh winter. There was a lot of starvation and sickness within the city and amongst the Muslims who were attacking. So in 718, once again, the Muslims withdrew. I think attesting to, on the east side was the Bosphorus, water. And if you recall the drawing that we had once of the city, there were like two sets of fortified walls around the city. It attests to the strength of the city. In 720, Leo the Syrian appointed his son, Constantine V, as co-emperor with him. And they restored the empire, brought about unity for a while, but in a much smaller geographic area. Down here is Egypt, down here is North Africa. Look, there's just a little bit of North Africa now in the empire. Part of Italy is no longer in the empire. The Balkan states, all up in here, are no longer in the empire. This Syrian and Muslim areas are no longer in the empire. But they did succeed in bringing about some temporary unity on a smaller scale. And of course, Constantinople was basically the center of that. In 726, Leo the Syrian published an edict condemning the use of icons. And he commanded that there was a large icon of Christ over the there were different gates, kind of like Jerusalem, into Constantinople. One of them was the Chalcedonian gate. The Chalcedonian, for Chalcedon, the suburb. And there was an icon of Christ over that, and he specifically sent soldiers to take that icon down, which they did. In the city, a riot ensued because of that. Some people were killed. Many in the east objected to his edict. The west rejected it outright, although he had expected that the western part of the empire would abide by his edict. So we can talk about the heresy or the conflict of iconoclasm, which is what he started by virtue of this edict. And there are two words that are important to understand. Iconoclasts, who were the people that agreed with him. He certainly was an iconoclast. They were against the use of icons. And then that, of course, created the need for another word. Iconophiles, lovers of icons, the other side. The historic, traditional side, the side that we're on. This edict completely rejected icons and their veneration and the cults, this cult of saints. It included the rejection of panel paintings and mosaics and frescoes, this art that had been developing, Christian art. It was against images on sacred vessels and vestments what the priests wore, any images. Why did it occur? What was iconoclasm's cause? Well, as far as I can determine, there are three reasons that historians mention. And then I'll add my fourth reason. First was perhaps the influence of Islam. You remember Leo, the emperor at the time, was in fact a Syrian, had come from basically an Islamic area and knew Islam. Another possible reason suggested by historians is that secular, outside of the church, culture wanted to liberate art from the church because it had become such an integral part of the church. And that revolt, if you would like to call it that, was certainly inspired by the emperors, Leo the Saurian and his successors. At the time, there was also a kind of an outburst of Hellenistic spirituality, Greek spirituality, which disdained or rejected anything artificial or material, like a board with an icon on it. Personally, I think it was a question of power. I think that the Isaurian emperors wanted to subjugate the church to the state. You recall from earlier discussions, this is what happened in the Roman West. But it did not happen, certainly had not happened by this time, in the East. But I think that's what it was all about. There were a lot of church leaders who rejected the edict of iconoclasm. They saw the veneration of icons as a long tradition that went way, way back earlier to apostolic times. There are some readings that I'll pass on about that. And most of those people were persecuted and or killed. One of the individuals worth mentioning who was an iconophile at the time of this conflict, he lived from around 676 to 749, was St. John of what?
Damascus.
Damascus. Syria, no less. He was born in Damascus to a prominent Christian family, the Mansour family. And if you go to Oklahoma City, you will find lots of Orthodox Christians in St. Elijah with the last name of Mansour. This family and he were responsible for the emperor's taxation in Syria. They were kind of in with the Syrian establishment, although they were certainly Christians. He received a Muslim and a Greek education. He excelled in music, astronomy, geometry, and theology. He's another Justinian I, perhaps. And he became an official in the caliph's government. And when Leo published this edict of iconoclasm, St. John of Damascus wrote to Leo and 3 different treatises defending holy images, the veneration of icons, and basically kind of attacking verbally Leo for doing what he did. Leo, in response, forged some documents that said that St. John was going to attempt to overthrow the caliph in Syria and sent that document to the caliph. When the caliph got the document, he obviously believed it because he called for St. John and cut off his right hand. St. John asked for the hand, received it, and took it and immediately prayed in front of an icon of the Theotokos. And his hand was completely restored. He immediately went to a monastery near Jerusalem and was ordained a priest in 735 and stayed there. One of the notable miracles in the history of the church. During all that, in 740, Leo the Syrian died. So his son, Constantine V, took over. They had been co-emperors. He continued iconoclasm. And he called a synod of 338 bishops, quite a few, not an ecumenical council, but a synod that ratified his father's edict and saying specifically, this is interesting, that in depicting Christ on an icon or an image, his 2 natures are separated, and only the human nature, what you can see, is depicted. Thus, venerating icons is Nestorianism. I think that they were looking for an excuse. Monks now in particular resisted this. They were persecuted and many of them were killed. Incidentally, if you look, and this was Constantine V. But if you look in the history of the church, you frequently won't find Constantine V. You'll find him referred to as Constantine Copronymus. Copronymus is composed of two words,
Oh, God.
which translated mean dumb named. When he was young, he was given the nickname Copronymus. Have any idea why? Because at his infant baptism, he relieved himself in the baptismal font.
You can never live it down.
Yeah.
That's number two.
They really know how to stick it to people back then, didn't they? You had to watch out.
I don't imagine that they call him that to his face. In 775, so he was around for a while, exhorting iconoclasm, he died. In 780, his successor died, leaving his Constantine V's Copronymus son, Constantine VI, not Copronymus. He was 10 years old as emperor. Constantine VI. Since he was so young, he was placed under the guardianship of the empress. And her name was Irene, an important person. She now lives in Omaha. Not really. That's a different Irene. Irene was an Arab, a Syrian convert to Christianity, and she was very much two things: an iconophile and a supporter of monasticism. So she called an ecumenical council to deal with this conflict in 786. But it was broken up at sword point before it even got started by soldiers who were loyal to the memory of Constantine the Dumb-named. So it was not, it didn't occur. But she had a lot of power, so she specifically had these soldiers transferred to the battlefront in Asia Minor. Which allowed her, note her first attempt in 786, after she got rid of the soldiers, to call for an ecumenical council in Nicaea in 787. And she specified that no royalty be present. Good idea. The bishops who attended the Seventh Ecumenical Council in Nicaea had been very much influenced by the tradition and history of the church, of course, but also by the writings of St. John of Damascus, a strong iconophile. There are some readings for you on that. And they decided and expressed in this council that iconoclasm was at an end. Specifically, they said that. Could somebody read that?
We declare that next to the sign of the precious and life-giving cross, venerable and holy icons, made of colors, pebbles, and other material that is fit, may be set in the holy churches of God, on holy utensils and vestments, on walls and boards, in houses and in streets. These may be icons of our Lord and God the Savior Jesus Christ, or of our pure Lady, the Holy Mother of God, or of honored angels, or of any saint or holy man. For the more these are kept in view through their iconographic representation, the more those who look at them are lifted up to remember and have an earnest desire for the archetypes, and so that one may render to them the veneration of honor, not the true worship of our faith, which is due only to the divine nature, but the same kind of veneration as is offered to the form of the precious and life-giving cross, to the holy Gospels, and to the other holy dedicated items. Also that one may honor these by bringing to them incense and light, as was the pious customs of early Christians, for the honor to the icon is conveyed to the archetype. Thus, one who venerates the icon venerates the reality of the one depicted on it.
Clear? Yea, in 787, the Seventh Ecumenical Council. 3 years later, in 790, Constantine VI, now 25 years old, was declared emperor, out from under the guardianship of Irene. He was cruel, immoral, became increasingly unpopular. He was really a terrible emperor.
I bet he got a nickname.
Well, no, he didn't get a nickname.
Oh, he didn't.
He got his head lopped off.
He survived for 7 years, and on August the 15th of 797,
Dormition.
his mother, on the Dormition,
Uh-huh.
his mother, Empress Irene, had him blinded. In the imperial palace. That kind of ended him. We're awfully close to 800,
So he was, how old was he when that happened? Now?
25.
He was
No.
20.
No.
He was
25 and 70 was 32.
32.
Wow.
So you can lead an army of Bulgarians without a nose, but it's hard to do it without eyes.
How they blame
He's-
him.
You can't find the
Spoon.
caves.
Sticks or,
Wasn't it like, didn't they take a heated spoon and then just like scoop his eyes out or something? There was
Wow.
This was his mother.
well, she
Irene
didn't,
was his
she
mother,
didn't,
or just
she
his-
didn't do it,
Well, she had it done,
but
but I
she
mean,
had it done, yes.
she was his mother.
Yeah. She was his guardian.
She commanded it to be done.
So he was pretty terrible.
She later becomes Saint Irene in the church.
Yeah.
Or am I skipping ahead? I'm sorry.
Huh?
In 800, over in the west, we're switching over to the west now very briefly, Pope Leo III does what?
Crowned Charlemagne emperor.
Crowned Charlemagne Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And after he placed the crown on him, he got down on his knees in front of Charlemagne in subjugation, and that is the first and only time a pope has ever done that. So, in 802, Charlemagne said, Irene, let's get married. With the obvious intention of reuniting the eastern and western parts of the empire.
And legitimizing his claim.
Right.
Well, that's one thing, just to point out, I mean, you've been very clear on this. You know, we talk about Byzantium and, you know, that's a much later term.
Right.
These people, until the end of their empire, until in Constantinople, they didn't think of themselves as Easterners. They didn't think of themselves as Greeks. They didn't think of themselves as the Byzantine Empire. They were Romans. They didn't live in Rome. Remember, Rome had moved centuries ago.
The new
For all intents, so they, you know, even if you still go to parts of the world where our people, spiritually our people are from, like in Syria, you ask them, what are you? And they'll say, Rome Orthodox. I'm Roman Orthodox. They still identify as Roman. And as probably you're reading, Roman culture and Roman civilization was preserved uniquely and only in the eastern half of the Roman Empire. We see already what's happening here, and what will continue to happen is what is the Roman Catholic territory. Roman Catholicism is neither. It's neither Catholicism in the true word, nor is it Roman, because it's Franco-Latin. It's a completely different culture and language group. And it begins now with a guy was he in France?
Charlemagne?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Saying that he is the,
He went to Rome.
right,
To be crowned.
is the head of the Roman Empire.
And I think he pulled Pope Leo's fat out of the fire.
He did.
Yes, immediately preceding this. So this was kind of a quid pro quo.
Wow, she's lying there.
The Roman West was under attack by northern tribes again. And so he pulled Leo's fat out of the fire
So to speak.
by taking an army to Rome and being crowned. Anyway, this precipitated open rebellion in the east and it was prevented from happening. Irene was deposed, and she died. Immediately after her being deposed, iconoclasm came back with great fury. It was brought back especially in government of the empire and in the military and military circles. And people began to blame, they began to blame the veneration of icons for all the wars that were occurring, for the invasions, for the sicknesses that had occurred. In 815, the emperor was now Leo the Armenian. A successor to Leo the Syrian, and he was an iconoclast. And he demanded that the Patriarch of Constantinople go around and raise all the icons that were still up to above human height so they could not be venerated. The Patriarch of Constantinople refused to do that, and he was immediately deposed and exiled. On Palm Sunday of 815,
Is that Tarasius?
I think it is.
Photius's uncle. Okay. Yeah.
Although,
Sorry, Palm Sunday. Oh, sorry. Irene is a great martyr, a different person. So
Different
people are named Irene are named for other Irenes.
Different Irene.
a
Yeah.
different,
Okay.
yeah.
You, which is a good thing.
Sorry, I didn't follow.
That's all right.
Anyway, in 815 on Palm Sunday, because of all this renewed conflict, literally thousands of monks processed through the streets of Constantinople carrying icons. What happened to them? They were all captured, persecuted, and most of them were drowned. There were two more emperors during the iconoclastic times, Michael III and Theophilus. And Theophilus was married to Theodora. Empress Theodora. Is that who Theo is? No. Well, or more than one Theodora. Two. Iconoclasm continued, much persecution, especially the monks, who were really the leading element against iconoclasm. Through additional emperors until Theophilus died. As soon as Theophilus died, in 842, So you see, it went on for some time. Empress Theodora stopped all the persecutions, and a year later, in 843, she put Patriarch Methodius in the position of Patriarch of Constantinople, and he was an iconophile. She was too, obviously. And that really marked the beginning of the end of iconoclasm. It was sometime later, but in 893, was a very important day for us. After things had settled down and it was clear that the decision of the Seventh Ecumenical Council was going to be the way it is. On the first Sunday of Lent in 893, there was a special feast, what do I want to say, procession through the city, and it's called the Triumph of Orthodoxy, where the Christians in Constantinople carried icons through the city and into the Church of the Holy Wisdom. And we, as you know, celebrate that today, when we take icons and process through the church and around the church. So that was, it took a long time, but basically that was the ultimate resolution of the issue of the Seventh Ecumenical Council. By this time there were 100,000 monks still alive in the empire. They had prompted a revolt against the Saurian dynasty that wanted to subjugate the church to the state, basically. This is one of those times when monasticism saved the church, or at least saved the church as it was supposed to be and as it is today. The end.